Everything seems distorted for the blue-haired young man as he looks around in utter confusion. He then wonders what is happening in that hospital hallway. Meanwhile, someone desperately shouts medical orders, calling for more oxygen. The doctor instructs the interns not to stop chest compressions on the patient. One of the young men's hands continues pressing down on the man's chest with all his strength. You can see the effort the guy in blue is putting in to try and save that life. Standing by, our boy simply watches the entire scene unfold right before his eyes. He then wonders who that individual trying to save the patient on the gurney could be, because for some reason the young man in blue looks incredibly familiar to him. At that moment, he realizes something shocking and his expression instantly changes. He sees the intern striving with a look of pure determination on his face. An older physician then yells to prepare the defibrillator at 200 joules. With that, they use the device on the patient's chest in an attempt to revive him. But an assistant announces that the man's heart rhythm isn't returning, and immediately after, the heart monitor flatlines, signaling it's too late. Our main character continues to watch it all, completely helpless. The head doctor looks disappointed as they were unable to save the patient. Everyone stops what they are doing and just stares at the figure lying on the gurney. The doctor then, with a sullen expression, asks everyone to cease all procedures. He looks at the others and officially declares the patient's time of passing. The physician then states the patient's name, which was Kim Jong-soo, and the time of passing was declared at 3:22 in the morning. Our boy hears the announcement that the patient had passed away. Following this, one of the medical staff covers the man's body with a white sheet. At that moment, the young man's vision starts to become distorted and strange. Everything around him seems to dissolve as he stares into the void. Suddenly, he wakes up startled inside a train packed with people. We then see the train continuing its journey normally along the tracks. He asks himself if he might have drifted off to sleep without noticing. He gives himself a few light taps on the face to wake up, as the day ahead will be very busy. Then he reaches into his coat pocket to grab something. With a smile, he pulls out his medical identification card. The badge reads Dr. Shin Son-han of Yongguk University Hospital. Son-han then recalls that ever since he was a child, he was very skilled with knives. His parents arrive home, calling his name and saying they waited a long time. His mother finds him in the kitchen and asks what he is doing there. Little Son-han turns with a smile, a stained knife in his hand. His mother screams, asking why he's holding a knife, and his father rushes over. But upon looking at the counter, their expressions of terror vanish instantly. The little boy had perfectly filleted a fish like a professional chef. His father declared that Son-han was a prodigy who would inherit the family restaurant. So he grew up thinking this was his destiny, but something changed his path forever. On TV, an interview was airing with Korea's greatest surgeon, Professor Baekyu Shin. The professor waited with a serious and calm demeanor for the interviewer's final question. At that, the reporter asks what advice he would give to students who dream of being like him. Dr. Baek then pauses for a moment before giving his answer. With great humility, he says he doesn't yet consider himself a great surgeon, so he isn't sure what to say. A young Son-han hears the reporter mention that the doctor is praised for having the hands of a god, but Professor Baek insists he still has a long way to go in his career. However, he brings up an old European saying that has existed for over 200 years. According to the doctor, 3 things are necessary to become a surgeon of excellence. The first thing he names is that a good surgeon must have the eye of an eagle. The second would be to possess the hand of a lady, to be gentle and meticulous in procedures. And finally, he says a person must have the courage of a lion's heart. The physician explains that one needs sharp observation, just like a hunting eagle. The boy is captivated as he hears that one must also be as gentle as a lady's hand. Simultaneously, the surgeon speaks of having the fearless and mighty determination of a lion. Young Son-han's eyes sparkle with pure inspiration from the man's words. Looking at Baekyu Shin on the screen, he thinks how that guy is simply incredible. In that moment, he felt a beacon of light in his somewhat lost childhood. He remembers a saying that whoever finds a light in the darkness will walk towards that light for the rest of their life, and this was his light. With newfound purpose, the young man shouts to his father that he is going to become a doctor. But the patriarch instantly refuses, leaving the boy completely stunned by the response. He then demands to know why, saying his father should be happy with the news. The man asks if his son is aware of what kind of family they are. He explains they have been merchants since the Joseon era and have been in business for 30 years. His father brags about his 12 television appearances, showcasing his widespread fame. He also mentions the thousands of reviews and the near-perfect rating of their restaurant, proudly presenting the famous and successful Shin family sashimi restaurant. He says the boy's destiny is to wield sashimi knives, not to be a doctor. The patriarch asserts that Son-han was born for this and must use his talent for the business. But the young man retorts that he wants to save people with a blade, not slice fish. Nevertheless, his father's answer remains a firm and resounding no. The boy gets frustrated, stating that he is studying hard to become a doctor. His father then reveals that this is precisely the problem, leaving his son confused. With brutal honesty, he says that Son-han takes after him and isn't gifted academically. He apologizes, saying their family doesn't have the brains for it, making it impossible. He then tells his son to stop this foolishness and shows him a rare fish to prepare. However, the boy refuses and with an angry swipe knocks the fish away. He yells that he'll keep trying until he succeeds, no matter how many attempts it takes. Then, with great skill, he prepares a perfect and glistening plate of sashimi. Immediately after, he throws his gloves on the floor and runs out, declaring he will become a doctor. But reality was harsh and his grades were terrible, which secretly pleased his father. Still, the young man refuses to give up and studies with determination to get into college. In the midst of studying, his sister enters the room asking him to mend her skirt. He complains but ends up stitching the skirt with impressive skill. After finishing the repair, he shoos her away, needing to get back to his books. Time went by, and after much effort, he finally went to check his college entrance exam results. But he was rejected, and his father celebrated by juggling knives right behind him. Unshaken, the young man begins studying for his second attempt at college admission. And once again, he is rejected while his father puts on a circus act to mock him. On his third try, he studies late into the night, as quitting was not an option. And then, after all the hard work and dedication, something finally shifted for him. A congratulatory banner is hung in front of the family restaurant, celebrating his acceptance. On his third attempt, he takes a photo with his family on the university campus. With a bouquet in his hands, he smiles, having finally become a medical student. He believed that if everything went smoothly, he would at last become a great doctor. Or so he thought until he found the campus closed and swarming with protests. The young man collapses to his knees, unable to believe what was happening right before him. Disheartened by it all, he decides he will just fillet fish for the rest of his life. But time passes and we see that fate had other plans for our boy. Years later, he stands before the enormous Yongguk University Hospital. The college had closed, but he passed the licensing exam and became an intern there. This is one of the 5 largest hospitals in Korea with an outstanding reputation. The place is massive, attending to over 8,000 outpatients daily. Because of this, the medical team working there numbers in the thousands. And the biggest reason he chose this hospital is that his idol Professor Bake once worked there. With a determined gaze, he knows the journey to become his dream doctor has only just begun. Sanahan then walks through the hospital corridors, ready for his first day. A nurse calls out to him, asking for an electrocardiogram on a patient with chest pain. This kind of task is routine for interns, so he heads off to handle it immediately. With the results in hand, he begins to analyze the patient's heart rhythm. Sana notices the test results look slightly different from the previous day. He then informs the nurse that the attending physician needs to be notified. The young doctor explains it appears to be atrial fibrillation and should be checked. The woman praises him for being so thorough, saying he'll be very well liked by everyone. The intern gives a modest laugh and says he certainly hopes so. Suddenly, a group of senior doctors approaches and asks why they're chatting. The one who appears to be the leader is Kim Byung-soo, a resident known as Kim the Cobra. Sanhan immediately bows and greets Dr. Kim Byung-soo. One of the other doctors whispers that the newbie is from Ulwoon University. They then scoff, saying it's that third-rate college that went under due to corruption. The resident looks down at the young man with an expression of pure disdain and judgment. At this, our boy becomes visibly flustered, unsure of what to do. The Cobra then asks if he has checked on the patient in room 1705. The young doctor confirms he has and hands over the clipboard with the exam results. But Kim also requests the previous night's chart, which the intern provides at once. He explains that yesterday's rhythm was normal, but today it shifted to atrial fibrillation. He repeats that it doesn't seem serious, but it would be wise to take a look. All at once, the intern feels a chilling aura and wonders if he did something wrong. The resident then asks his name, and the young man replies, Shin Son-han. To the boy's surprise, Dr. Kim simply says, "Good work." He commends him for being organized and reviewing the results before just reporting them. The young man feels a wave of relief, thinking his preparation paid off. He knows making a good impression is crucial, as residents are the first to evaluate him. Dr. Kim then continues speaking, a very serious look on his face. He remarks that someone from a defunct college would have to work exceptionally hard to be here. He then tells the intern to work hard and learn as much as possible before leaving. At that moment, Xiaohun understands. Kim doesn't believe he has a chance of staying at the hospital. The resident says that while grades ultimately decide everything, it's a known fact that outsiders don't last here. But the intern asserts that he came prepared for this challenge, and Kim seems taken aback. Dr. Kim then adjusts his glasses and brings up a slim possibility. He mentions that perhaps if the newbie is chosen as intern of the year, he might have a shot. Our protagonist grows thoughtful upon hearing about the Intern of the Year title. This is an award of great honor, and winning would give him an almost 100% chance of staying. Another doctor then scoffs, saying an outsider has never been chosen for that award. Regardless, Kim says the opportunity is there and tells the young man to give it his all before walking away. The young doctor bows and thanks for the advice as they depart. Burning with frustration at this elitism, he vows to survive in that hospital, no matter the cost. And one day, he knows he will be in that group photo of the hospital's most important physicians. His ultimate goal is to be recognized as an excellent doctor, just like Professor Baekyu's Shin. Just then, a colleague calls his name and approaches him in the hallway. The woman waves at him with a smile, asking if he has eaten lunch yet. He says he was about to, and she replies that she needs to finish a few things first. She complains that she still has 5 surgical consent forms to get signatures for. Seeing her distress, he offers to gather some of the signatures to help her out. She is overjoyed and surprised by the unexpected help from her coworker. She thanks him profusely, calling him her savior as she hands the paperwork over. With that, the doctor says she'll buy him coffee later and rushes off, looking thrilled. With a smile, he takes the papers to help his colleague. He then starts to look through the forms to see which patients they belong to. Upon reading one of the names, he spots something strange at Kim Jung-soo. His expression shifts immediately as he remembers something crucial. In his dream, he witnessed a doctor declaring the time of passing for a patient named Kim Jung-soo. It was the exact same name he had heard in that bizarre dream, and he recalls the time was announced as 3:22 in the morning. He tries to calm himself, thinking it can't be, it must be a coincidence. Shaking it off, he heads to the patient's room to get the form signed. Parting the curtain, he calls for Mr. Kim Jung-soo and asks for his signature. And there on the bed, he sees the gentleman sitting beside a younger woman. But the moment his eyes land on the patient's face, he is utterly shocked. The gray hair, the deep-set eyes, the dark complexion, they're identical. He is certain this is the same man he saw in his dream. Our young doctor no longer has any doubt it's the same patient. And the nameplate on the bed confirms the patient's name is indeed Kim Jung-soo. The woman beside him then asks what the doctor is doing there. The young man is momentarily frozen, stammering slightly before he can reply. He then collects himself and explains he came to go over today's procedure. He wonders if the identical name and appearance are just one massive coincidence. The patient's daughter gets his attention, and he turns to see what she needs. With a worried look, she asks if her father is going to be all right. She holds up the form, pointing out the part that says he might not survive. The young doctor offers a reassuring smile, explaining they list even the slightest chance of complications. He clarifies that the procedure is performed more than 10 times a day, and everyone does fine. He then guarantees the chance of an incident is almost zero, which calms the woman. Confidently, the young man states that only the best doctors in Korea work here. The patient's daughter appears much more at ease after hearing his words. She then turns to her father, telling him not to be afraid as the doctor exits the room. The intern turns back with a self-assured smile before closing the door behind him. Time passes and night descends upon the large, imposing university hospital. It is already 8 in the evening, and Soundhan is exhausted, finally seeing the end of his shift. But he remembers he is on night duty, so his work is not yet over. With that, he rushes to the break room to prepare for the long night ahead. There, he splashes water on his face to ward off drowsiness and stay alert. To keep himself focused, he starts lifting some heavy weights in the on-call room gym. The young doctor pushes himself hard to maintain his strength and stamina. It's clear he takes his physical conditioning very seriously, even when exhausted. Another intern, Kim Jun-wook, sees him there and asks if he's working out. With a smile, Jun-wook says he can't skip a workout or he'll lose his muscle mass. Jun-wook remarks that his friend looks awful, and Seonhan collapses onto a bed, complaining about work. While lifting, his colleague asks if he's heard a certain story, and he asks which one. Jun-wook mentions the tradition of a serious incident always happening when new interns arrive. His friend hopes for a quiet shift, and our protagonist agrees, but the young doctor remains on the bed, his mind fixed on something deeply troubling. He remembers that in his dream, patient Kim Jung-soo passed away, and he fears it might come true. He then sits up, telling himself not to entertain such absurd thoughts. Still, the worry is plain on his face as he stares into space. Suddenly, the intern leaps from the bed with a look of sheer determination. He hastily grabs his lab coat while his friend watches, completely baffled. Jun-wook asks if he's going to study, and Soundhan says he just needs to research one small thing. His colleague is shocked to see him reading a book on cardiac disease. Soundhan thinks to himself that he must prepare for that one in a million chance. Time ticks by, and the clock on the wall shows the night is getting late. Meanwhile, his roommate sleeps soundly on the top bunk, snoring loudly. But our protagonist remains at his desk, studying without a moment's rest. He stays up all night, focused on his books to be ready for any emergency. The young man stretches, complaining about how hard it is to study after such a long break. Abruptly, an emergency alert blares from the speaker, calling for resuscitation. The code is for the 17th floor, and both interns prepare to sprint there. The intern shouts for his friend to run, and the two of them bolt down the hospital corridor. This is the most critical emergency possible, where a patient's life hangs by a thread. Their female colleague then arrives, running and yelling for them to wait up. The protagonist recognizes her instantly and calls her name, a bit surprised. He asks about the emergency, but she doesn't know who went into cardiac arrest. As soon as the elevator doors slide open, they all dash out towards the room. But a senior doctor suddenly appears and yells at them on the spot. He scolds them, saying someone's life is at stake and they took too long to get there. They all apologize, and the doctor orders them to take turns with chest compressions. These cardiac compressions must be sustained for at least 30 minutes without interruption. One of the interns begins performing CPR on the patient with all his strength. But upon seeing the man's face, our protagonist is completely frozen in place. The patient in critical condition is none other than Kim Jung-soo, the man from his dream. He wonders if his dream is actually becoming a reality. One of the doctors yells to charge the defibrillator to 200 joules immediately. With that, they deliver a shock to the patient's chest to try and restart his heart. When it doesn't work, the doctor orders them to charge the device once more. A second shock is then administered to the gentleman's chest in an effort to save him. An assistant announces that the man's heart rhythm has finally returned to normal. The monitor beeps, indicating that his vitals have stabilized and the emergency is over. With the situation under control, all the doctors look much more relieved, though exhausted. But Dr. Kim, with a furious expression, shouts for the interns to listen up. He lectures them that the later they arrive, the less time they have to save a patient. He then starts a pop quiz asking about the proper frequency for using an ambu bag. The other interns are paralyzed, hesitating without knowing the exact answer. The doctor then glares at them, mocking their inability to respond promptly. Seeing this, our boy thinks that things can't go on like this. He raises his hand and answers that ventilation should be administered every 6 seconds. Dr. Kim stares at him with a stern expression, listening to the young man's response. The young intern continues his explanation, despite feeling the pressure. He asserts that ventilation must be performed precisely every 6 seconds. The resident tests his knowledge again with another technical question. But the young man answers correctly that the pressure must be above 20 millimeters. Without missing a beat, the doctor asks for a medication dosage, shocking the others. Sanan then explains that the initial dose is 300 milligrams, followed by 150. Dr. Kim falls silent for a moment, just staring at the intern. With a faint smirk, he says that at least one of them seems to be paying attention. The young man thinks he only knew the answers, because the dream had been replaying in his head all day. The resident then turns to the others, berating them for not even knowing the basics. He yells at the ashamed Yangguk graduates for being outdone by a newbie. The other interns look crestfallen after the humiliating reprimand from Dr. Kim. Angrily, the doctor shouts, asking what they are still doing there, and tells them all to get out. As they walk away, a colleague comments that thanks to Soundhan, they avoided a worse scolding. His friend then complains about Dr. Kim's terrible personality, vowing never to go into internal medicine. But unlike the dream, the patient is stable, yet Soundhan feels a crucial piece is missing. He remembers that in his nightmare, Mr. Kim Jung-soo passed away at 3:22. Looking at his phone, he sees it's only 2:40 in the morning. The young man then realizes the time of passing in his dream was exactly 3:22. That strange vision has already come true once with the patient's cardiac arrest. If the dream repeats in 40 minutes, patient Kim Jung-soo will be lost. At this realization, he stops walking and tells his colleagues to go on without him. He turns and runs back, saying something about the patient is deeply unsettling him. His female colleague decides to join him, asking what seems so strange. The two of them then race desperately through the hospital corridors to check on the gentleman. When they arrive, they find the patient sleeping peacefully in his room. The young man asks if she noticed anything unusual, and she tries to recall something. She then remembers passing him earlier in the hospital hallway. The doctor says that at the time, the patient smelled strongly of cigarette smoke. The young doctor is taken aback and asks if she is certain about the smell. She confirms it, adding that she thought it was odd but forgot about it due to her workload. He thinks that while smoking isn't instantly fatal, the patient's addiction is a major concern. The intern then wonders just how much the gentleman must smoke daily. With that, he and his colleague check the patient's records on the room's computer. In his history, they find that the man smokes the equivalent of 80 packs per year. This staggering amount of smoking leaves both young doctors in shock. Looking at the data, the young man realizes the patient's condition is extremely fragile. On top of the heavy smoking, he has hypertension, diabetes, and other risk factors, and his heart's pumping efficiency is a mere 35%. His friend remarks that it would be more surprising if there weren't complications after surgery. Essentially, his coronary arteries are narrow and failing to supply enough blood. The procedure involved placing a metal stent to widen that blood vessel. So he asks himself how the patient could have declined, since he seemed to have recovered. The young man starts to panic, desperately trying to recall any other detail from his strange dream. Suddenly, he clutches his hair and a single word flashes in his mind. He remembers a fibrillation that is unresponsive to shocks or medication. If that were to happen, the patient's chance of not making it is incredibly high. He then points to the monitor and says the electrocardiogram rhythm looks strange. The waves on the screen are subtly changing with some unusual noise. His colleague doesn't fully understand but agrees it seems slightly abnormal. With that, the young man dashes out to warn everyone that the patient is in grave danger. His coworker is stunned and asks if he is being serious. They then enter the staff room where Dr. Kim yells aloud, angry, "What?" The resident is furious, saying he had just praised the newbie, and now he's trying to lecture him. The young man apologizes immediately, trying to explain that wasn't his intention. But Dr. Kim glares at him, asking how an intern dares to give advice to a resident. Our protagonist is left speechless, visibly unnerved by his superior's reaction. The resident continues to stare down the young man with a look of pure rage and contempt. He then gets up and forcefully pokes the intern's shoulder with his finger. He yells in the young man's face that an intern's job is simply to follow orders. The intern feels a pang of regret, thinking he shouldn't have said anything since he can't see the future. But then he remembers what's at stake and closes his eyes for an instant. In the next moment, he opens them again, his expression filled with determination. Surprisingly, Dr. tells the young man to go on and state his opinion. He then questions if the newbie is the type to raise a problem without offering a solution. The resident taunts him, asking if he's getting cold feet about the responsibility now. Realizing he's past the point of no return, the young man decides he cannot back down. With all his conviction, he declares that he thinks the patient might need an ECMO. Dr. Kim is taken aback and repeats the word ECMO, not understanding the suggestion. This is a machine that functions as an external heart, considered a last resort. The resident then sighs, wondering what on earth this intern is thinking. The young man explains that ECMO became well known for saving many lives during the pandemic. The resident shouts that the machine isn't a magic cure, all but a final desperate measure. But the intern insists the patient's condition could lead to refractory fibrillation. Dr. Kim lets out a derisive laugh at the audacity of the newbie before him. He asks if the boy truly believes the fibrillation will return after the patient has already recovered. With absolute certainty, the young doctor answers, "Wes," and thinks to himself, "Well, that's it for me." He knows that after challenging a resident, his evaluation has just gone down the drain. The young man is a bit surprised by his superior's reaction at that moment, but Dr. Kim concedes that the possibility he raised isn't entirely out of the question. With that, he picks up his phone to call someone and handle the situation. The resident calls a certain Dong Seep, who is also on duty. Meanwhile, our protagonist and his colleague can only watch, completely bewildered. We then see the hospital's intensive care unit, fully equipped and prepared. Patient Kim Jong-soo has now been moved to the ICU for closer observation. The doctor says he has moved the patient and asks if the intern is satisfied now. With a relieved smile, the young man expresses his gratitude for the resident's help and understanding. His superior says he's never met an intern like him and that he will remember his name. He then addresses the young man by his full name, Dr. Shin Seonhan, with a serious expression. After making his point, the resident turns and leaves, leaving the two of them there. Our protagonist's colleague lets out a long, heavy sigh of pure relief. His colleague is incredibly impressed, telling him he was amazing and so brave. The young man admits he has no idea where that courage came from and figures he's in deep trouble now. But the doctor insists that, despite everything, he handled the situation really well. She then adds that he seemed like a genuine, real doctor. With a somewhat sheepish smile, our protagonist simply thanks her for the compliment. Meanwhile, the patient's heart monitor continues to show stable readings. The two interns keep vigil by Mr. Kim's bedside in the ICU. The clock reads 3:02 in the morning and all seems quiet. The young man thinks that, according to his dream, the second emergency should happen any minute. His coworker dozes off from exhaustion, her head resting on his shoulder. Suddenly, our protagonist feels a strange jolt course through his body. The doctor jolts awake, denying she was sleeping as he feels a twinge of pain. He tells her she's exhausted and suggests they head back to the on-call room. The young man says they've monitored enough and perhaps he was worried over nothing. But as he glances toward the bed, he realizes something is terribly wrong. Both interns' faces contort with sheer panic. The patient's daughter runs in, shouting that it's ventricular fibrillation. With that, the emergency alarm blares once again throughout the hospital. The woman cries out for a doctor, but our protagonist is frozen, unable to react. But then he seems to snap out of his trance and rushes into action to begin the procedures. He yells to his colleague, Yeon Seo, to grab the ambu bag, and she immediately complies. As he presses down on the patient's chest, he realizes the contents of his dream were real. The young man is overcome with desperation, unsure how to process his nightmare becoming reality. Senior doctors rush into the room to help with the emergency. They ask what's happening, and a doctor informs them it's a fibrillation. With that, they switch places to continue with the compressions. The resident then takes over the chest compressions, using all his experience. Our protagonist then realizes everything is happening exactly like in his dream. The orders, movements, and even the shouts are identical to the nightmare. The scene he pictured in his mind is repeating right in front of him, down to the last detail. One of the physicians warns it's still fibrillation and asks them to halt compressions. They charge the defibrillator to 200 joules and deliver a shock to the patient. He then realizes that if this continues, Mr. Kim Jong-soo isn't going to make it. The man lying on that bed doesn't have much time left if nothing changes. And just outside, the patient's daughter cries desperately for her father's life. The image from his dream, with everyone standing around the body, floods his mind. He feels powerless, thinking he failed to change the future with what he knew. Suddenly, our protagonist shouts for everyone to clear a path. A surgical team rushes in carrying an emergency equipment cart. The young doctor feels a wave of relief. The patient's only hope has just arrived. Their team leader is thoracic surgery specialist Song Yoo-ju. Entering the room, she immediately asks how much time has passed. The young man quickly replies that 12 minutes have gone by in 6 cycles. Dr. Song announces she'll use both femoral arteries and asks everyone to step back. With that, a green surgical drape with 2 openings is placed over the patient's legs. The sterile cloth covers the man's lower body for the procedure. The team then gets into position to begin inserting the ECMO device. The surgeon starts the procedure with precision, ensuring the vein's safety. Using a syringe, she punctures the patient's skin to find the correct spot. Blood begins to fill the syringe, indicating she has found the vein. An assistant hands the guide wire to her so she can continue. Very carefully, she inserts the guide wire to lead the catheter toward the heart. A doctor confirms on the ultrasound that the wire has entered the vena cava. After securing the vein, she cleans the area for the next surgical step. The surgeon then announces the next phase is to locate the artery for the ECMO. Our protagonist watches it all, his face a mix of awe and surprise. But while trying to find the artery, the syringe suddenly stops drawing blood. One of the assistants grows nervous, something unexpected has occurred. He informs the surgeon that the syringe is no longer pulling in blood. She immediately orders a stop to the chest compressions. She instructs her assistant to withdraw the syringe slowly to find the artery. Blood starts filling the syringe again, signaling the problem is resolved. The doctor asks if he got it, and the assistant confirms with a nod. With the guide wire now in the artery, the team can move forward. The assistant announces the guide wire is in, and the surgeon continues her work. With everything in place, she finally activates the ECMO machine for the patient. Blood starts to circulate through the machine's pump, just as it should. We then see the blood flowing through the device's tubes without any issue. Oxygenated blood begins to flow back in the patient's body. The machine is functioning perfectly, the procedure was a success. A physician confirms the flow is good and there's no recirculation. With the ECO's help, the patient's breathing normalizes and he stabilizes. The surgeon then congratulates everyone for their quick and excellent work. Our protagonist and his colleague let out a sigh of pure relief and exhaustion. Suddenly, the clock on the wall catches his eye, and he's taken aback. It's exactly 3:22 in the morning, the same time of passing from his dream. But this time, patient Kim Jong-soo didn't pass away and remains alive in bed. His life was saved thanks to the ECMO, which acted as a second heart. Dr. Kim rushes into the room asking what happened. A doctor explains that the patient's rhythm didn't return, so they had to use the ECMO. The surgeon then reveals it was Dr. Kim Byung-soo who called for the procedure. The resident seems a bit confused as he can't recall making that request. The other doctor then congratulates Kim on a job well done, leaving him speechless. Our protagonist smiles, saying that was a close call just as he expected. After all the commotion, the hospital's waiting area is now empty and silent. The young man gets a few coins to buy a drink from a vending machine. Standing there, he reflects on everything that happened during that crazy night. He questions if what he saw in his dream was truly a glimpse of the future. His colleague then appears and asks if he's alright, noting he looks a bit pale. She laughs, saying she only had to use an ambu bag, so she was feeling fine. She then asks how he knew the patient would go into fibrillation again. He is at a loss for words since he can't just tell her about his dream. With an awkward smile, the young man says it was simply a hunch he had. She gives him a skeptical look, not seeming to buy his answer. Suddenly, Dr. Kim appears behind them, making them both jump. He tells the young man to get out of the way if he isn't going to buy a drink. A can of coffee drops from the machine after the resident pays. The doctor picks up the beverage to hand it to our protagonist. He admits the intern had a point and that he ultimately did the right thing. According to the resident, moving the patient to the ICU was a brilliant move. But he warns the young man not to get cocky, saying it was just beginner's luck. The young doctor is stunned to receive the drink from his superior. With a slight smile, Dr. Kim tells him he did good work today. After handing him the drink, the resident simply turns and walks away. The two interns stand there, trying to process what just happened. Suddenly, his colleague freaks out, screaming with pure excitement. She says he just received a confession, since Kim never gives anything to anyone. She jokes that a gift from the Cobra is practically a declaration of love. With the can in his hand, the young man thinks about that strange dream he had. He wonders how it's possible, as the dream showed everything with perfect accuracy, but he decides to push it aside and not overthink it for now. What matters is that he managed to save a patient's life, and that's enough. Outside the hospital, the sun is shining and cherry blossoms adorn the scenery. Our protagonist and his friend are finally celebrating a day off. His buddy asks what his plans are, and he says he's going home to sleep all day. But their friend appears out of nowhere and gives the intern a hard slap on the back. She jokes that his back is broad and perfect for a good smack. She then asks about patient Kim Ji-young's surgery and his condition. The young man is relieved to learn the operation went well and the patient will be discharged. She then invites him somewhere, but the young doctor is confused. The woman explains that all the interns are going out for drinks together tonight. He says he never got a message, so she tells him to come along. Their friend then says his goodbyes. He's heading to the gym and skipping the drinks. The young man tries to decline, but she drags him along to drink with the others. She says the weather is far too nice to waste it sleeping at home. They soon arrive at a fried chicken bar to meet up with their colleagues. The doctor greets everyone, remarking how quickly the group assembled. Everyone cheers for her arrival, calling her the goddess of the medical school. She asks them to stop since she already graduated and invites our protagonist to sit. However, one of the colleagues doesn't seem pleased to see him there with her. An intern chugs a glass of beer with pure satisfaction. He mentions this is his first time going out since the internship began. Another colleague laughs, saying it must be tough interning after 30. The man raises his glass, shouting for everyone to drink up and have fun tonight. Our protagonist feels a little out of place amidst all the commotion. He thinks that the young graduates are really tight-knit, making him feel like an outsider. A colleague then comes over and asks for his name again. The young man confirms it, and the other guy cordially invites him for a drink. His new acquaintance asks how he's adapting, being from another university. Suddenly, his friend jumps in and asks if they haven't heard the rumor about Seonhan. She tells everyone that last week, he actually stood up to Dr. Kim. The group is floored, shouting that the world must be ending. They call him Enkais for confronting the Cobra, and invite him to drink with them. At least, he thinks he won't be left out of the party now. One of his colleagues then asks what specialties everyone is considering. It's a topic that always comes up whenever the interns get together. Choosing a specialty is the most critical decision in a doctor's career. One says he's leaning toward rehabilitation or radiology, which gets a laugh from another. Someone else notes that anesthesiology is popular now because of pain clinics. They ask Yeonsu if she still wants pediatrics, but she seems unsure. Then they joke that dermatology is the top choice for smart, beautiful women. The most sought-after fields are usually the ones that pay the most or are less demanding. Each intern's preference varies greatly depending on their personality. His friend then asks him which department he's thinking of joining. Another colleague adds he's also curious to hear an outsider's choice. The young man replies that he's considering surgery, which surprises everyone. He adds that thoracic surgeons seem really cool, too. Thoracic surgery is one of the most dreaded specialties because it's so brutal. A colleague then asks why he'd want to go down such a difficult path. With a smile, he says he just finds the image of a surgeon to be amazing. He remembers the sight of a doctor preparing to begin an operation. The intern thinks the scene of a surgeon calling for a scalpel is incredibly cool. But his colleagues laugh, saying nobody thinks that way anymore. They make a toast, and he offers a slightly awkward thanks for the attention. But one guy slams his glass down, saying there's nothing cool about it. He claims the young man only chose surgery because he has no better options. The drunk colleague slurs that coming from a failed university, he can't afford to dream big. One of the friends gets angry, asking the guy if he's lost his mind. But the man keeps shouting that they're all just pretending to support him for personal gain. He gets worked up, asking if he's the only one there who's thinking this way. Suddenly, the guy feels sick, his cheeks puffing out. He makes a run for the bathroom, and the others tell someone to go after him. Our protagonist wonders why that colleague dislikes him so intensely. A friend tells him not to worry, explaining the other guy was just really drunk. But he thinks to himself that he can't expect to only meet good people in a hospital. He knows that high grades are no guarantee of a good personality. Dealing with human lives doesn't automatically mean someone is emotionally mature. Abruptly, he feels that same strange sensation from before as his eyes begin to glow. The young man is shocked. It's the exact same feeling from that first time. He's back in that dark, empty space, just like in his first dream. Someone shouts to restrain the guy who's causing a scene in the bar. The drunk colleague is out of control, as others try to pin him to the floor. Our protagonist then snaps out of his trance to find his head is bleeding. He doesn't understand how his body could be at the bar while his mind was somewhere else entirely. Suddenly, the young man snaps out of it, his eyes widening in pure panic. He's back at the bar table, confused and trying to piece together what happened. His friend asks if he's okay because he looks completely zoned out. The young man wonders, terrified, if he had that strange dream again. He recalls his future self observing his past self like a phantom, but he tries to convince himself it was a coincidence. He doesn't have superpowers. He stands up and tells his friend he's going to use the restroom quickly. Walking through the bar, he thinks he should have just gone home to sleep as he'd planned. He decides to say his goodbyes and leave, since the party's mood is ruined. But then he spots a few stacks of beer crates and realizes they're the same ones from his dream. The drunk colleague stumbles out as the others try to hold him back. Suddenly, the intern's hand brushes against the stack of crates, and they start to topple. Our protagonist watches in horror as the beer crates fall toward him. All the bottles shatter on the ground, creating a huge mess in the bar. The other interns rush to help their drunk colleague who has fallen down. His friend asks if he's alright, and he says he's fine, no problem. But then he sees that the other colleague is hurt and realizes the exact same thing happened. With wide eyes, he wonders if he really does have the power of premonition. Back in his hospital room, he tries to make sense of his strange new powers. He deduces the premonition strikes suddenly, revealing future accidents. While a vision is active, time in the real world seems to freeze completely. These visions always seem to show incidents happening somewhere in his vicinity. However, the time frame is unpredictable, ranging from a few minutes to several hours. He figures this will happen frequently, as accidents are a common sight in the hospital. He then realizes a choice awaits him the next time a vision occurs. He can either intervene and try to alter the future or simply let events unfold. Pen in hand, he jots down his thoughts on this newfound responsibility in his notebook. His decision could completely reshape the future and the destinies of those around him. He then adds a fifth item to his list, labeling it change. March comes to a close, marking his final day as an internal medicine intern. Entering a room, he greets an elderly woman resting in her bed. The patient recognizes him and asks if it's really his last day. He reassures her that he isn't going far, just transferring to another department within the hospital. The woman praises his gentle hands, saying he never causes her pain when drawing blood. She complains that other doctors are always rough when they try to do the same. Gently, he inserts the needle into her arm to collect the blood sample. He succeeds on the first try, remarking that it was quick and painless for their last time. The patient looks disappointed, wishing she could have introduced him to her granddaughter before his departure. He playfully remarks that her granddaughter must be quite beautiful then. The woman replies that her granddaughter is 11 years old and already knows her multiplication tables by heart. A nurse spots him in the hallway and compliments his blood drawing skills. She explains that an intern's procedural talent is evident from the very beginning. Medical abilities span from simple blood draws to major complex surgeries. To master major operations, one must first excel at the most basic procedures. He then asks for her opinion of him, wondering if he's at least average. The head nurse declares he has the steadiest hands she has ever seen on a doctor. She also praises his excellent bedside manner, assuring him he'll become a great physician. He feigns tears of joy, but the nurse just laughs and calls him an actor. She then inquires about the next department on his internship rotation. Suddenly, Dr. Kim appears, calling him "kid" in the middle of the hallway. The resident motions for the young intern to follow him for a private word. They stop by a set of vending machines where the doctor buys a canned beverage. He hands the drink to the intern and asks about his upcoming rotation. The resident warns him that the emergency room will be challenging and asks about someone named Yu Bong Keel. He then asks if the young man is still set on specializing in surgery. The intern is taken aback that the news has already circulated throughout the hospital. Dr. Kim says that's good, adding he would have smacked him if he'd chosen internal medicine. The resident then turns and walks off, leaving our protagonist standing alone. He jokes that he actually enjoyed internal medicine, but the doctor just shoos him away. As he tosses the empty coffee can into the trash, his superior approaches him again. The resident tells him to give it his all in the next department to avoid making a bad name for himself. With a faint smile, he admits the young man did a fine job over the past month. A smile spreads across the intern's face, happy to have his hard work acknowledged. He's learning that his actions can truly influence the people and situations around him. With March over, a new chapter of his internship begins in the emergency medical center. Our protagonist feels doomed the moment he sees his new team. A team of 8 interns is assigned to the ER, thrown into grueling 24-hour shifts. He sizes up his new teammates for the coming month. First up is Oh Jung-won, the hospital's oldest and most notorious slacker intern. The second is Jo Jin, the very same guy who started the brawl at the bar. His heart sinks as he realizes he's stuck with 2 of the worst possible partners. The older intern is complaining to the other for injuring his hand in a clumsy fall. The man shows off his casted hand, declaring he won't be able to do any strenuous work. He then smirks, offering to handle all the paperwork since his hands are out of commission. A sense of dread washes over the intern. The next month in the ER is going to be a complete nightmare. The older colleague asks what the plan is, and our protagonist insists they have to work hard. But the other man claims he's too old for that and plans to rely entirely on the rookie. The 2 of them then join forces, ready to unload all their responsibilities onto him. He reflects on how heavily an intern's evaluation depends on their teammates. Turning around, he comes face to face with another member of his new group. He rubs his eyes, trying to focus and make sure he's seeing correctly. When he opens them again, the vision fades, replaced by the sight of a serious-looking girl. His casted colleague recognizes her, excitedly calling out her name, Ham So Damn. The 3 interns stand awkwardly as the guy continues to chat with the young woman. The other one explains she's a super royal from Yongguk University and practically a celebrity. Her entire family, going back to her grandfather, has been on the medical school's faculty. He warns him not to cross her because every professor on staff adores her. The talkative intern then produces 2 bags filled with drinks and snacks for the group. He boasts that he bought them all for the professors as a gesture of goodwill. Our protagonist grabs a drink from the bag, intending to offer it to the girl. She finally glances up from her phone, her eyes meeting his directly. He's slightly taken aback by her cold reaction to his simple gesture. It's a stark reminder that she's considered royalty, while he's just the hospital's kid. Watching the other 2 bicker, he wonders how this team will ever manage to function. Suddenly, the door swings open, a voice complains about the heat. A doctor enters, introducing himself as Yu Bong Keel, the 3rd-year resident. All the interns bow in respect as the resident asks about their shift. He muses on how he'll whip these fresh-faced interns into proper shape. The resident tells the interns to stick with him so he can show them the ropes of the ER. He stops abruptly and asks if the newbies know the definition of an apocalypse. The eldest colleague nervously answers it's the end of the world, filled with fire and destruction. A grin spreads across the doctor's face as he notes the intern has the right idea. He then throws open the doors to the emergency room, declaring that this place is exactly that. The interns are utterly stunned by the chaotic scene before them. People are crying out for help, and a stroke victim urgently needs a neurologist. Nearby, a woman on a gurney screams in agony, convinced she's not going to make it. The parents of an injured child desperately plead for a doctor's attention. The new team of interns is paralyzed, unsure of what to do amidst the mayhem. The resident welcomes them to the apocalypse, otherwise known as the emergency room. The four rookies look around, terrified by the sheer volume of patients. Though it's still morning, every single bed in the ER is already occupied. A woman is clutching her stomach with an intestinal issue, and a man is on the floor, getting sick from dizziness. There's also a boy with a dog bite and a construction worker with an injured finger. The protagonist realizes the ER is unlike any other department in the hospital. The doctor then quizzes them on the purpose of the emergency room. The older intern replies that it's for treating urgent patients, of course. The ER's primary function is to stabilize critical cases and transfer them to specialized departments. For that reason, the resident explains, an ER doctor must be proficient in every field. Terrified, the four interns shout in unison that they understand his orders. The resident then rallies them to begin work, leading them down the bustling corridor. He approaches a patient and gently asks if her stomach pain is severe. The doctor examines her, asking her to bend her knees so he can pinpoint the pain. The woman winces, clarifying that only her upper abdomen is hurting. The resident informs her that her lab results have come back normal. He concludes the most likely diagnosis is gastritis, not appendicitis. He advises her to return if the pain shifts to her right side, as that could indicate a serious problem. The doctor explains that the interns will handle many straightforward cases like hers. He then moves to the next patient, an elderly woman who needs a bowel disimpaction. Afterward, he tends to the boy with the dog bite, reassuring him that the wound isn't deep. Speaking slowly to the foreign construction worker, he explains that the gash will require stitches. Our protagonist is in awe of the resident's skill in managing every case. He recognizes this as the true capability of a third-year resident. The doctor adds that if a critical patient arrives, they must handle whatever they can. He points to a monitor displaying a long list of tasks the interns must complete. With a wry smile, he asks if the newbies are thrilled with their heavy workload. He then divides the tasks among the four of them and tells them to get started. The day is a blur, consumed by the ceaseless activity in the Yongguk Hospital ER. At lunchtime, our protagonist finally gets a chance to catch his breath. In the cafeteria, he's completely drained, trying to recall how many patients he saw this morning. Despair sets in as he remembers it's a 24-hour shift with no breaks. Out of the corner of his eye, he spots his teammate Ham, so damn at a nearby table. The young woman eats calmly, scrolling through her phone with a stoic expression. He sits down with her and tries to make small talk about their chaotic morning. She replies with a single word, her eyes still glued to her smartphone. He feels awkward after the short, dismissive response from his new colleague. Trying to stay positive, he tells himself they can warm up to each other gradually. The intern maintains her cold, distant demeanor, completely ignoring his presence. He realizes she's a tough nut to crack but resolves to make an effort to get along. He offers her a piece of fried shrimp, but she flatly refuses. His attempt to build rapport is shut down yet again, making the atmosphere tense. He asks about her previous rotation, but she cuts him off before he can finish. The conversation fizzles out once more, leaving him at a loss for words. In a final attempt, he remarks that the ER is more interesting than internal medicine. At that, she slams her phone on the table and glares at him with sudden rage. She angrily demands to know what he finds so interesting about their situation. He is completely bewildered by his coworker's explosive outburst. She springs to her feet, shouting at him about how any of this could possibly be fun. The girl vents her frustrations, saying she isn't enjoying this one single bit. He then challenges her, asking if she hates being a doctor, and her answer stuns him. She confesses she hates all of it, but the ER is the worst because of a past incident. She recounts how a patient once attacked an intern, causing them to quit medicine entirely. Then she asks if he doesn't find the thought of facing such dangers terrifying. The girl laments that she can't understand why anyone would want to be a doctor, given the risks. Genuinely curious, he asks why she chose this profession in the first place. She admits she only became a doctor because her parents made her, and for no other reason. It dawns on him that they come from two completely different worlds. He reflects on how many people become doctors due to good grades or parental pressure. As a result, they spend years in medical school without a true passion for the field. The girl states she'll transfer to a department where she won't have to see patients later on. She suddenly shivers, and he's confused by her abrupt change in mood. With a sigh of relief, she seems to feel much better in an instant. His colleague then points at his plate and asks to try the shrimp. She reminds him that he had just offered her a piece moments ago. He questions her sudden change of heart, but she just says it looks delicious now. With a sly grin, the protagonist decides to have a little fun with the situation. He pulls his plate away, playfully telling her she can't have any, which annoys her. A moment later, he laughs and passes the plate to her, admitting it was just a joke. She eats happily, and he thinks she has a quirky but refreshingly honest personality. He feels a sense of relief, thinking that maybe they'll be able to get along after all. Night falls, and another grueling shift comes to an end at the university hospital. In his office, resident Yu Bong-chil begins writing the intern's performance reviews. He starts with Jo Jin-jae criticizing him for being lazy and not taking his duties seriously. Next, he assesses Oh Jung-won, noting that the intern is sharp but tends to be a slacker. Then it's Ham So-dam's turn, whom the resident refers to as royalty among royalty. The doctor notes her skills are subpar and that she consistently repeats the same mistakes. He decides to be blunt in his assessment, giving her a C for her profound lack of confidence. Lastly, he evaluates our protagonist, Shin Son-han, admitting the intern surprised him. The resident had concerns about his background, but his practical skills are excellent. However, he doesn't seem to be a genius or someone who stands out significantly from the pack. The doctor finds his evaluation of the young man to be inconclusive and leans back in his chair, lost in thought. During the second week, the intern asks his older colleague if he's done the blood cultures yet. The other man claims to be busy and asks the rookie to handle the task for him. The patient is an elderly woman, and he can immediately tell finding a vein will be a challenge. He knows his colleague is intentionally pawning off the difficult job on him. His casted coworker asks where So-dam is, and the other replies that she's vanished. Suddenly, enraged shout echoes down the hall, startling the three interns. They see a large, furious man yelling at their teammate Ham So-dam, just a few feet away. The girl looks terrified, her head bowed as the man continues his tirade. The man shouts that she'd been jabbing his father's arm for 20 minutes with no luck. His colleagues mutter that she's finally caused a major incident over a simple procedure. To be fair, arterial blood draws are tricky, and getting an earful from patients isn't uncommon. The man grows even more irate, demanding a nurse take over the procedure instead. The nurse explains only doctors are authorized to perform the test, but he refuses to listen. He finally snaps, complaining loudly about the incompetence at the university hospital. The colleague with the broken arm calls her pathetic for failing at such a basic task. At that moment, our protagonist rushes forward to intervene and support his teammate. He offers to perform the blood draw in her place, surprising everyone. The man demands to know who he is, and the intern replies with a confident smile that he's a doctor. With that, he pulls up a chair to sit and begin the procedure. He apologizes, explaining that finding veins on someone with his father's build can be difficult. To de-escalate the situation, he says it reminds him of his own father. In truth, it's a complete lie. His father's build is nothing like the patient's. He knows that building rapport with a patient is a crucial first step in their care. He speaks calmly to the patient, asking him to sit up for a moment. The son warns that if he messes up, he'll personally tear the entire hospital apart. The young intern tells him not to worry, admitting that while he's not perfect, he's capable. Unlike his colleague, he gained extensive procedural experience during his internal medicine rotation. With a plan forming, he asks the son to apply pressure to his father's right wrist. The son complies, pressing a gauze pad firmly against his father's wrist. The intern then checks if the patient is comfortable and asks him to remain still. Looking at the man's arm, he understands the son's fury. It's covered in bruises. Arterial blood tests typically use the radial artery, which is located in the wrist. But since arteries lie deeper than veins, one must feel for a pulse to locate it. With the massive hematoma on the patient's wrist, feeling a pulse there is impossible. He decides to search for an alternative site further up the arm. His mind flashes back to the incredible skill of the thoracic surgeon, Song Yu-ju. She had located a patient's vessel instantly, relying solely on experience and instinct. He tells himself he can't possibly fail to find an artery that's practically stationary. He searches for a pulse in a different spot, feeling a faint thrumming in the upper arm. Carefully, he tries to pinpoint the exact location, willing the artery to reveal itself. Suddenly, a faint glimmer of light guides him to the right spot, and he finally finds it. His eyes widen in triumph as he locates the artery. He warns the patient it will sting a bit and asks him to bear with it for just a moment. He then inserts the needle with precision, praying the artery doesn't shift. The patient's son watches intently, his expression a mask of tension and distrust. The intern notices the blood isn't flowing readily and wonders what's wrong. The son and his colleague look on apprehensively as he focuses on the task. Slowly, blood begins to fill the syringe with a weak but steady flow. As the syringe fills, he successfully completes the difficult procedure. The amount of blood collected is more than enough for all the necessary tests. The patient's son looks surprised and asks if it's already over. With a smile, the intern remarks that the gentleman endured a lot for such a small sample. The patient mentions it was painful before, but this time was just one quick prick. The grateful man praises the intern and tries to give him a tip, which he politely declines. He comes to his colleague's defense, insisting she's skilled and was just having an off day. The son, now much calmer, thanks him and shakes his hand warmly. Just then, the resident comes rushing down the hall, alerted by the commotion. He says he heard shouting and brought an ultrasound machine to help locate the vein. The intern informs him the procedure is already done, leaving the resident stunned. When asked how, he explains he found the vein simply by palpating with his hands. The doctor is thoroughly impressed by the rookie's skill and praises him profusely. He congratulates him but advises him to wait for the ultrasound next time just in case. The resident then turns to Ham So-dam, his expression turning serious. The girl keeps her head lowered, mortified by her failure. The doctor lets out a weary sigh, unsure how to handle the struggling intern. He tells her to go to the restroom and pull herself together before returning to work. She bows respectfully, acknowledging her superior's command. With that, she turns and walks alone back towards the emergency center. The resident asks the protagonist to keep an eye on his colleague, warning him of the danger. He says one wrong move could turn her into a malignant presence on the team. Earning that label from your peers is the worst fate that can befall a doctor. Taking a short break, the young intern sits on a bench outside. A female teammate approaches and asks him to look after Dam during their rotation. She says she feels sorry for the other intern and he asks why. The woman reveals that their colleague has been the target of bullying since medical school. He's surprised, assuming her royal status would have made her popular. She explains that her prestigious background was the very source of the problem. Every minor mistake was blown out of proportion, causing her to become withdrawn and timid. He understands now the constant psychological pressure has eroded her confidence. His colleague says she has her own worries, and he calls her out for being cold. But he has to agree that they are all doctors and must focus on their own responsibilities. The woman insists, saying she's genuinely worried Dam might make a catastrophic error. He reasons that an intern's duties are limited, so the risk of major harm is low. He tells her not to worry, assuring her that nothing that serious will happen. All at once, the intern's eyes fly open as a terrifying vision takes hold. He's frozen on the bench as the world around him seems to grind to a halt. He stumbles to his feet, terrified, wondering if it's happening again. A mysterious voice echoes through the darkness, calling for all the interns. In his vision, the intern finds himself in a dark room, facing a group of senior doctors. A man in glasses is shouting that he's never seen anything like this in his entire ER career. He realizes that he and his fellow interns are all the targets of this dressing down. The chief resident then points at them, declaring that they will all receive a C for their evaluation. The intern is in utter disbelief, unable to process that he's receiving such a low mark. Panic sets in. A C on his record would effectively end his career at this hospital. The superior furiously demands to know what on earth they did to warrant such a punishment. The scene shifts, showing him separated from the others, bearing the brunt of the doctor's anger. He thinks it's unfair for everyone to get a C, realizing his future is completely ruined. The man states that when one person makes a mistake, the entire team shares the responsibility. The intern desperately wonders which of the four of them could have caused such a massive incident. Their resident tries to apologize on their behalf, but the chief cuts him off, refusing to hear excuses. The superior is rendered speechless by the fact that a rookie is being sued for malpractice. The protagonist's mind fixates on the word sued, and his eyes widen in pure terror. He knows this is the ultimate disaster. A mistake of this magnitude will turn the hospital upside down. He frantically wonders who caused the catastrophe, praying it wasn't him. The chief points directly at the culprit, and the intern strains to see who it is. The vision intensifies and his eyes bulge in absolute shock. Back in reality, he lets out a yell and knocks over his food, startling his colleague beside him. The woman worriedly asks what's gotten into him to react so violently. He apologizes to her, lamenting the terrible timing of the vision. He's frustrated, not knowing who will cause the accident or how he can possibly prevent it. Returning to his shift at the medical center, he can't stop replaying what he saw. Peeking over a chart, he carefully analyzes his teammates one by one. His thoughts race as he tries to determine which of the four will be responsible for the accident. He struggles to focus, needing to solve this mystery before it's too late. His older colleague stretches, remarking on how quiet the weekend has been. He then announces he's taking a quick break, asking to be paged if needed. The senior intern asks him to retrieve consent forms from a patient. He doubts it's the older one. His probability of causing a major incident is low since he avoids mistakes. His casted colleague tries to persuade the other to kill time with him. He also seems unlikely to be the culprit as his injury limits him to simple tasks. The intern concludes that the highest probability of error lies with his other female colleague. He watches her from afar as she concentrates on her work at a hospital computer terminal. He continues to discreetly observe her when she suddenly walks towards him. The girl calls him by name and asks if she can speak with him for a moment. That evening, the two of them stand on a hospital terrace overlooking the city lights. She begins by reminding him of the question he'd asked earlier about her reasons for becoming a doctor. The intern explains she's been under immense pressure from her parents to excel academically since she was a child. But now that she's actually a doctor, she's terrified of the patients and the responsibilities. She bemoans becoming a doctor for nothing, feeling she's already made 5 mistakes today alone. He realizes she's a classic case of a student who's been pushed too hard their whole life. It clicks, she's the one who causes the lawsuit, a ticking time bomb in the ER. He understands now that a C grade will be more devastating for him than for anyone else. The young man tells her she doesn't have to bear the weight of her mistakes alone. The girl looks surprised by his supportive tone, her eyes filled with curiosity. He encourages her to reach out to him or their other colleague whenever she needs help. With a reassuring smile, he suggests they work together to prevent any more errors. He hopes that by planting this idea in her mind, he can avert the disaster from his vision. The young woman is moved, saying he's the first person who has ever been genuinely kind to her. She thanks him for his supportive words, admitting no one has ever offered to help her before. Feeling a bit awkward, he brushes it off as normal teamwork to hide his true motive. His teammate praises him again, asking if his kindness is related to his name. He explains his name isn't about kindness, but is actually related to fresh fish. He tells her his family owns a sashimi restaurant, and they all have names related to fish. The girl bursts into laughter at the story, and he sees a side of her that isn't so somber. She's happy they've broken the ice and apologizes for laughing so hard. The intern understands she's just struggling because her shyness holds her back. He feels a wave of relief, believing he may have successfully prevented the worst-case scenario. The next day, his colleague seems much brighter, her smile more relaxed. She arrives at the ER and cheerfully greets two nurses at the station. One of them recognizes her and asks what brings her in so early. The intern offers to help with any pending tasks, and the nurse gratefully accepts. Work is piling up, so she asks the rookie to check on a patient in Zone B. The nurse explains the patient had a procedure, but his original problem has returned. The patient's name is Wang Jino, and the name rings a faint bell for the intern. She says his urine needs to be drained and asks if the young doctor can handle it. The procedure is a catheterization, a critical intervention to prevent the bladder from rupturing. The young woman senses the urgency. A 20-minute wait is far too long for a patient in this state. She remembers her colleague's advice and decides this is a chance to gain more experience. With a determined smile, the intern confirms she will perform the procedure. She then gathers the necessary supplies on a tray to begin the task. The girl dons a fresh set of blue scrubs, mentally preparing herself for the procedure. She pushes the supply cart through the ER, searching for bed B7. The young woman takes a deep breath to calm her nerves, reminding herself she knows how to do this. Parting the curtain, she apologizes to the waiting patient for the delay. As she pulls back the curtain, she finds herself face to face with a famous and strikingly handsome young man. She is completely starstruck, rendered speechless upon recognizing the patient. It is none other than the K-pop idol and rapper Wang Jino, professionally known as King Jino. The intern struggles to believe that her patient is such a massive celebrity. The intern remains frozen, unable to process that she's about to treat a famous idol. The idol calls her doctor, his voice pulling her out of her stupor as he asks for help. He pleads with her, saying he feels like his bladder is about to burst. The rapper even starts to rhyme about his pain, which finally snaps the girl out of her shock. She takes a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on the treatment and ignore his celebrity status. The young woman asks about his symptoms, and he complains of an intense, sharp pain. She reassures him that the urology professor will be there to see him shortly. The idol thanks her, and she instructs him to remove his pants and lie down on the bed. The intern is mortified as the patient begins to undress right in front of her. She blushes profusely but struggles to maintain her professional composure. The young man announces he's ready and she turns to begin the procedure. As she turns back, the girl is startled by the sight before her and lets out a panicked yelp. She tries to calm herself, repeating in her head that it's merely an elephant's trunk. The patient groans in pain, urging her to hurry up with the procedure. The phrase, "elephant's trunk," echoes in her mind, sending her into another wave of panic. Finally, she gets a grip and announces the procedure is complete. The intern explains that catheterization is simpler than an arterial blood draw. She warns him that the lubricating gel will feel a bit cold as she begins the application. The idol groans with pain and discomfort as she proceeds. The young woman realizes something is wrong. The catheter isn't advancing smoothly. She wonders if she used too much gel as her gloved hands feel slippery. With one final push, she forces the catheter, trying to get it into place. The intern finally succeeds and lets out a sigh of relief, thinking the hardest part is over. She prepares to apply pressure his abdomen to check for urine flow. Suddenly, the patient flinches, and she sternly tells him to lie still. The idol cries out and apologizes profusely, saying he lost control. He apologizes again, his face turning the color of a ripe tomato from embarrassment. The young woman panics as she realizes what has just happened with her celebrity patient. The situation escalates and the intern screams in terror, completely at a loss. Our protagonist hears the screams and rushes over, asking what happened in the room. His colleague recounts the disastrous incident involving the idol and the now stuck catheter. The young man is floored by the news, finding it hard to believe what he's hearing. The other intern tries to finish the story, but is too overcome with second-hand embarrassment. The protagonist sighs, thinking he never thought he'd witness something so bizarre at the hospital. He's furious, wondering how anyone could possibly lose a tube during that procedure. The resident calls the intern into another room for a private discussion. The girl apologizes with her head hung low, deeply ashamed of her mistake. The doctor explains that patients can sometimes have unexpected physiological reactions. He clears his throat awkwardly, adding that she should have been prepared for such a possibility. The young woman nods in agreement and leaves the room, still visibly shaken by the ordeal. Her colleague remarks that she must have the worst luck in the world. He reveals she had shown up an hour early, eager to help, and ended up in this mess. The protagonist realizes his encouragement might have inadvertently pushed her into this situation. He's horrified by the thought that his attempt to prevent a disaster might have caused one instead. The idol is now in surgery to have the catheter removed from his urethra. The intern feels terrible that this catastrophe had to happen to a celebrity. He asks if the rapper is likely to sue the hospital for the medical error. His colleague doubts it, since it's a simple procedure and the idol himself had apologized. He jokes that the rapper probably won't want his legacy to be the Earthra incident. The young man feels a small sense of relief that a lawsuit is unlikely, but the guilt remains. The colleague with the broken arm appears, laughing and excitedly tapping on his phone. He announces he's updating their class group chat with all the juicy details of the catheter catastrophe. The protagonist's phone starts buzzing nonstop with messages from their classmates. The news has already spread like wildfire through the university, and everyone is gossiping about it. He feels like a complete fool for trying to help, only to make things so much worse for her. The intern is berating herself, convinced she was never meant to be a doctor. He finds her sitting on a staircase and tries to console her over what happened. He tells her not to blame herself, insisting it's a mistake that could have happened to anyone. The girl tells him to stop worrying about her and asks to be left alone. She's resolved to just get through the internship and then find a specialty that involves no patient contact. The young man tries to lift her spirits, telling her to learn from it and not make the same mistake twice. She continues to cry, saying her reputation is already ruined anyway. He decides he can't let things stand as they are and resolves to watch over her 24/7. With a smile, he offers her his phone number, telling her to call anytime she needs help. The intern blushes, wondering why he's being so incredibly nice to her. He turns away, annoyed, thinking to himself that if she messes up again, he's the one who'll pay the price. For his own survival, the young man must prevent his colleague from causing any further disasters. On a highway, a group of teenagers is joyriding in a luxury car at breakneck speed. The black car tears down the wet pavement as the friends party inside. One of the passengers shouts over the music, praising the car's incredible engine roar. His friend asks if he's sure it's okay he took his dad's car without permission. The girl in the passenger seat questions if the driver even has a license. Another boy scoffs, saying of course a first-year college student wouldn't have one. One of the teens eggs the driver on, telling him to floor it so they can feel the car's true speed. A wide grin spreads across the driver's face as he slams his foot on the accelerator. The luxury car flies down the highway at a dangerously reckless velocity. The driver weaves aggressively between other vehicles, yelling for everyone to get out of his way. Back at the hospital, an intern offers a can of soda to the third-year resident. The doctor takes a sip but immediately spits it out in disgust. He erupts in anger, demanding to know why the intern brought him a patient. The intern looks at the soda can in horror, clutching his head in panic. The resident points a finger at him, warning that if the ER gets swamped today, it's his fault. The piercing ring of the medical center's phone cuts through the tense atmosphere. A nurse answers the call, identifying herself as a hospital staff member. As she listens to the report of a traffic accident, the color drains from her face. The resident and the interns crowd around her to hear the details of the call. The doctor grabs the phone, asking for the number of patients and their conditions. His expression grows grim and tense as he listens to the information from the other end. The nurse relays that a total of 7 victims are en route to the hospital. The phones begin ring off the hook as the entire emergency department shifts into high alert. The interns brace themselves for the influx of critically injured patients. Our protagonist watches the situation unfold with a deeply concerned expression. The can of soda the intern had brought sits forgotten on a nearby counter. On the highway, rain pours down on a scene of devastation, with wrecked cars littering the asphalt. Inside the luxury car, the girl is screaming at the driver to be more careful. The young man just pushes the car faster, ignoring his friend's desperate pleas. The girl shrieks in terror, realizing they are driving into oncoming traffic. The driver laughs maniacally, continuing his dangerous joyride in the downpour. He floors the accelerator, yelling for everyone to move in a final act of madness. Suddenly, a massive truck materializes in front of their car at high speed. The friends scream in terror as they see the truck bearing down on them. The truck driver frantically tries to swerve, but it's too late to avoid the collision. The impact is catastrophic, sending the luxury car hurtling toward the side of the road. The truck overturns, triggering a massive pile-up with the cars behind it. The scene is one of utter carnage, with mangled vehicles and debris scattered everywhere. The luxury car is thrown sideways, flipping over multiple times before coming to a stop. A red car also flips, landing upside down on the slick asphalt. The black vehicle is a crumpled mess, smashed against the highway's concrete barrier. The driver stumbles out of the car, dazed, clutching his head in pain. His friends emerge from the wreckage in shock, complaining of aches and pains. One of them remarks they only survived thanks to the car's advanced safety features. The girl gets her friend's attention, pointing with a trembling hand at the scene around them. The highway is a disaster zone with destroyed cars and people crying for help. One car is completely totaled, its wheel pointing to the sky, a mangled wreck. An arm is visible from underneath an overturned red car. The gravity of their actions hits the teenagers, and they descend into full-blown panic. They frantically wonder what to do now, faced with the catastrophe they've caused. One friend asks the driver what their next move should be. The young man stares at the wrecked car, lamenting that his father is going to end him. The wail of approaching ambulance sirens begins to cut through the air. An empty liquor bottle lies on the wet ground near the crashed car. Back at Yangguk Hospital, the medical team assembles to receive the incoming victims. The chief of residents grumbles about young people losing their lives to recklessness. He asks for a patient count, and the resident confirms a total of 7 are expected. The protagonist worries that with so many critical patients, the potential for a medical error is high. The older colleague, however, views the situation as a valuable learning opportunity. The intern Hamso-dam appears visibly anxious about the arrival of the accident victims. The protagonist asks about their colleague with the broken arm, and the other intern says he's busy. He's relieved he won't have to worry about one more variable at the moment. The doctors line up at the emergency entrance, ready to receive the victims. Paramedics rush in with the first patients from the accident on emergency stretchers. The chief of residents is shocked to see 4 additional victims being brought in. A nurse reports that there are already more than 10 patients waiting for treatment in the ER. The resident instructs the interns to follow him and help manage the chaos. He asks a paramedic for the patient's conditions, and they relay the triage levels. The doctor orders them to move all level 1 patients directly to the resuscitation room. Patients are triaged on a scale from 1 to 5 based on the severity of their condition. Levels 3 through 5 represent mild to moderate cases with non-life-threatening pains and injuries. Suddenly, a level 1 patient is wheeled in, and the chief of residents becomes visibly agitated. The patient is unconscious and in shock, requiring immediate life-saving intervention. The interns are startled by the grave condition of the patient on the gurney. The resident orders them to get the victim to the resuscitation room without delay. The red sign above the resuscitation room door glows like an urgent beacon. The doctor asks for the patient's status, and the paramedic provides a quick report. The young woman has lost a significant amount of blood and was already drowsy upon arrival. The medical team urgently begins to take the patient's blood pressure. An oximeter is clipped to her finger to monitor her blood oxygen levels. The resident orders the team to prepare for immediate intubation. He tasks the protagonist and his female colleague with finding the source of the bleeding. The intern knows that oxygen and blood are the 2 most critical factors for the victim's survival. Every minute of delay in achieving hemostasis reduces the patient's chance of survival by 3%. The patient is covered in blood, making it difficult for the interns to quickly locate the wound. The resident impatiently asks if they found anything, and the young man says he's still looking. The intense pressure of the situation makes it hard to think clearly and act with precision. His colleague Hamso-dam locates the injury and urgently calls out to the team. Blood is pulsing from a deep laceration on the patient's left arm. The doctor orders them to apply direct pressure and stop the bleeding immediately. The protagonist is once again surprised by his colleague's competence and quick thinking. The chief of residents checks the patient's pupils and notes that they are reactive. The resident uses a portable ultrasound to scan the victim's torso for internal injuries. The scan reveals no internal abnormalities or signs of fluid accumulation. The resident urgently calls for the results of the arterial blood gas test. The older colleague becomes flustered under the doctor's intense pressure. The protagonist can see that the senior intern is panicking under the stress. The doctor shoves him aside, declaring he'll perform the procedure himself. He hands the blood sample to the intern and tells him to rush it to the lab machine. The flustered intern fumbles, and the syringe filled with blood slips from his grasp. As the syringe plummets toward the floor, the intern makes a desperate dive to catch it. He manages to snatch the tube just inches before it shatters on the hospital floor. The resident screams at the intern, telling him to pull himself together immediately. The protagonist realizes the situation is critical. His colleague is completely overwhelmed. The panicking intern pleads for help and hands the syringe to our protagonist. The older colleague is talented but cracks completely under pressure in a crisis. The protagonist volunteers to run the test, telling his colleague to monitor the patient. He knows he can't afford any mistakes and decides to handle it himself. The young man delivers the results to the chief of residents, who quickly scans them. The doctor's face darkens as he reads the alarming numbers on the printout. The hemoglobin level is critically low, confirming a major hemorrhage. The protagonist approaches the senior doctors, stating his belief that the patient has internal bleeding. The 3 of them stand grimly before the entrance to the resuscitation room. The resident realizes there must be a second, unseen source of bleeding. Internal hemorrhaging is insidious because it's not visible to the naked eye. If the bleeding is occurring in a vital organ, the patient's life is in immediate peril. The young woman remains unresponsive on the gurney, fitted with a cervical collar and an oxygen mask. The victim's life hangs precariously in the balance due to the internal bleeding. The chief of residents urgently orders more plasma and multiple units of packed red blood cells. A portable X-ray unit arrives, and the resident demands they get the scans done immediately. The technician positions the machine, instructing everyone to step back from the patient. The doctor yells at him to take the shot, saying the patient is fading fast on the gurney. The protagonist is aware that exposure to X-ray radiation carries inherent risks. The resident notices that the young intern is still standing in the resuscitation room. The doctor asks why he didn't leave, and the intern replies that he's fine. He jokes that you get more radiation on an airplane flight than from a single X-ray. The doctor chuckles, calling him a smart aleck for the flawed comparison. The The young man remains focused, determined to conserve every last drop of blood in the patient's body. He is completely zoned in, his entire being dedicated to saving the victim's life. The resident observes him in silence for a brief moment before returning to his work. The X-ray machine whirs to life, capturing the necessary images. The technician announces the scans are complete and displays them on a digital monitor. The chief of residence analyzes the images, his expression one of shocked realization. He points to the screen, declaring the source of the bleeding is the pelvis. The X-ray image clearly shows a severe fracture in the patient's pelvic bone. The chief of residence immediately orders a pelvic binder and a consult with orthopedics. The binder is quickly wrapped around the patient to compress the fracture and stanch the bleeding. The device is cinched tightly to stabilize the victim's shattered pelvis. IV bags of blood and saline are hung to rapidly replace the lost fluid volume. The resident watches the monitor, celebrating as the patient's blood pressure begins to climb. The patient's vital signs slowly start to stabilize on the gurney. The resident reports that her pressure, pulse, and oxygen saturation have returned to normal ranges. The chief asks about her level of consciousness, but she remains unresponsive. The young intern moves closer to the patient, checking her signs for himself. He watches her breathing intently, searching for any sign of a reaction. All at once, the patient's eyes flutter open in the resuscitation room. The intern alerts the team that the victim appears to be regaining consciousness. The chief of residence lets out a long sigh of relief, knowing they've weathered the worst of it. He orders a full-body CT scan and instructs them to continue the transfusions. The professor announces he's going to check on the less critical patients and exits the room. The protagonist breathes a sigh of relief, grateful that no major medical errors were made. He thinks of his panicked colleague and how a single, small mistake could have been catastrophic. Suddenly, his eyes fly wide in shock as he's struck by a crucial realization. He remembers there are still 10 more patients from the accident who need to be treated. The young man knows he cannot afford to let his guard down until the long night is over. The emergency room is pure chaos with patients crying out in pain from every corner. Doctors from other specialties have come down to help, but the department is still overflowing. The arrival of worried family members turns the already chaotic ER into a madhouse. He and his female colleague are tending to a patient with a bandage wrapped around his head. He remarks that the day has been truly legendary, the busiest he's ever been. The intern agrees, saying the constant adrenaline rush is keeping her wide awake. She admits that seeing people with such severe injuries makes her own complaints feel trivial. Her colleague praises her for keeping a cool head and for being the one to find the patient's wound. The young woman thanks him, adding that his words of encouragement really helped her. He smiles, asking if she still hates dealing with patients as much as she did before. She replies that she still hates it, and the high-stakes situation is still terrifying. But with a small smile, she adds that she has to do what needs to be done, regardless. He feels a sense of relief, thinking he won't have to worry about her for the rest of the shift. Suddenly, a man's angry voice cuts through the noise, demanding to know who's in charge. A furious couple storms up to the nurse's station, demanding to see the head of the department. A nurse tries to intervene, calmly asking them what the problem is. The man accuses the medical staff of negligence and of failing to do their jobs. He points to his son on a gurney, yelling about why he hasn't been treated yet. The older colleague whispers that the boy is the student who caused the massive accident. The protagonist realizes the man is the driver's father and is disgusted by his shameless audacity. The couple threatens to sue the entire medical team if the chief doesn't appear immediately. The nurse tries to reason with them, but the father insists his precious son is in pain. The boy's mother becomes irate when she learns there are more urgent patients ahead of them. She argues that it shouldn't matter whether they are treated now or later. The man loses all patience and violently shoves the nurse in the hallway. The protagonist shouts for security to help de-escalate the volatile situation, but his colleague Ham-So-Dam steps forward, ordering the man to stop causing a disturbance. The young man is taken aback by the look of pure fury on his teammate's face. He's never seen her this angry before and worries about what she might do. He fears the hamster's rage, once unleashed, will explode at any moment. The man points a finger at the intern, arrogantly asking who she thinks she is. The girl retorts that his son isn't the only person's precious child in the hospital. She gestures to the other patients, explaining that one of them nearly bled out. With righteous anger, she accuses him of being the reason for the chaos in the ER. The couple is left speechless, completely blindsided by the intern's fierce confrontation. She informs them their son will be seen when it is his turn and tells them to wait. The boy's father grinds his teeth in rage at the young doctor's insolence. The mother raises her hand, preparing to strike the intern who dared to stand up to her. The protagonist cries out, afraid his colleague is about to be assaulted. But the intern coolly cites Article 12 of the Emergency Medical Services Act. She warns him that anyone who obstructs medical services can face up to 5 years in prison. The couple is stunned by the young doctor's audacity and takes a hesitant step back. They can't believe a mere intern would dare to threaten a patient's parents. The boy's mother threatens to file a formal complaint against her with the hospital administration. The girl meets her gaze without flinching and tells her to go right ahead. She then introduces herself with perfect composure. Ham-So-Dam, intern at this university hospital. The couple is completely disarmed by the young doctor's unshakable confidence. The man seethes with rage, swearing he won't let her get away with this disrespect. The girl encourages him to file the complaint, telling him not to let her escape punishment. She then dismisses them, telling them to wait their turn as they are interfering with patient care. He is incredibly impressed by his colleague's actions, finding her courage invigorating. He asks if she'll be okay, but she just shrugs, saying she couldn't care less about a complaint. The intern carries herself with the dignity of a true royal, leaving him completely awestruck. He's about to call her over to help when the resident appears, looking displeased. He approaches the intern with a stern, disapproving expression on his face. The doctor reprimands her for shouting in the ER when it's filled with patients. The girl apologizes with her head bowed as the resident crosses his arms in irritation. He tells her to get back to work and focus on the patients who are still waiting. Then the resident gives the intern a subtle thumbs up, acknowledging her brave stance. He claps both interns on the back, reminding them there's still a lot of work to be done. The girl flashes a confident smile at her colleague, clearly feeling empowered after the confrontation. He smiles back, genuinely happy to see her growing more comfortable in her own skin. As the night draws to a close, the chaotic shift in the hospital finally ends. The resident tosses a bloody gauze pad into a biohazard bin and sighs wearily. He discharges 2 patients, who thank him profusely before heading home. The doctor says he can finally take a breath and congratulates the young man on his hard work. The intern remarks on the dynamic nature of the hospital, something he never experienced in internal medicine. The resident agrees, saying the emergency room has a unique identity to uphold. He describes the ER as a place of controlled chaos, where patients are constantly screaming or fading. The intern grows pensive, noting there's an emotional intensity here that's absent elsewhere. He speaks of the profound pride that comes from saving a life and returning someone to their family. The doctor looks at him intently, affirming that this is the singular pride of emergency medicine. The resident's words resonate deeply with the young man, stirring a powerful emotion within him. The doctor jokes, asking if he's considering making a permanent home here. The intern smiles, saying he would be honored if the university hospital would have him. He compliments the resident, saying it would be a privilege to work under him in the future. The doctor scoffs and gives him a playful shove, dismissing his words as cheap, clumsy flattery. He tells him to stop talking and get back to the patients who are still waiting. In the aftermath of the storm, the emergency room feels unusually calm and quiet. The young man feels a knot of anxiety in his chest, a nagging feeling he's overlooked something crucial. He approaches his older colleague, who is typing away at a computer station. The intern suggests they split the remaining patients to finish up more quickly. He casually mentions that even their colleague with a broken arm managed to see a lot of patients. This confuses the intern, as the other man had claimed he was unable to do any work. Just then, the casted colleague appears, triumphantly announcing his hand is fully recovered. The other intern accuses him of taking it easy, while the rest of them were drowning in the ER chaos. The protagonist finally understands the source of his persistent unease. He remembers Jo Jin-jae and his potential to be a liability to the team. The intern quickly pulls up his colleague's completed task list on the hospital computer. Nothing seems too complex, but one specific procedure makes his stomach clench. His eyes widen in horror as he reads the word thoracentesis on the screen. Procedure itself is not overly difficult, but a mistake can have fatal consequences. Patient is a 70-year-old man who presented with shortness of breath and chest pain. Young man confronts his colleague, asking if he's sure he didn't make any mistakes today. Other man bristles at the question, accusing him of trying to start trouble. He boasts that he was a star performer in his absence and tells him to mind his own business. The protagonist asks if he ordered a follow-up X-ray after the procedure. His colleague scratches the back of his neck, sheepishly admitting he hasn't checked the results yet. The colleague gets defensive, insisting he also worked hard treating other patients. A wave of anxiety washes over the protagonist, and he demands the other man open the X-ray file. The intern grumbles about his persistence, but pulls up the image on the computer. He stares at the screen in shock, unable to comprehend what he's seeing. The X-ray confirms that the fluid in the patient's lung is still present. The colleague casually mentions that not much fluid came out when he performed the procedure. The protagonist explodes, shouting at him and pointing frantically at the computer screen. He indicates a pneumothorax, collapsed lung, on the side opposite to where the intern performed the procedure. The man is stunned into silence, realizing the catastrophic mistake he has made. It dawns on the protagonist his colleague treated the right lung but accidentally punctured the left one. His eyes bulging, he asks if the intern seriously punctured the wrong lung. The other man trembles in fear, the full weight of his disastrous error crashing down on him. The protagonist sprints off to find the patient, asking which zone he's in. His desperate colleague grabs his arm, terrified of the news getting out. He begs him not to say anything, pleading that his evaluation will be ruined. The young man is rendered speechless by his colleague's selfishness in such a dire situation. The other man tries to justify his actions, suggesting they just keep the incident quiet. The protagonist is enraged by his colleague's attitude, unable to believe what he's hearing. The intern argues they should just let it be since the pneumothorax is small, At that, the young man snaps, screaming at his colleague and calling him a crazy, irresponsible fool. A heated argument erupts between the two interns at the ER counter over the grave medical error. The protagonist slams his fist on the desk, yelling that his colleague's evaluation is irrelevant. He locks eyes with his colleague, his voice cold as he warns, "That patient isn't going to make it because of you." The other intern freezes, intimidated by the protagonist's furious gaze. The young man screams, asking where the patient is, knowing 30 minutes have already passed. He bolts down the hospital corridors, desperately searching for the endangered patient. The two interns find the elderly man lying on a gurney in severe distress. The patient is groaning in pain, struggling mightily to draw each breath. He calls out for a doctor, gasping that he can't get any air into his lungs. The two interns stand there, momentarily paralyzed, unsure of how to help him. Monitor shows the patient's oxygen saturation has plummeted to 73%. The protagonist realizes the alarm must have been drowned out by the earlier chaos in the ER. He shouts for an oxygen mask to help the patient breathe. The protagonist stands beside his shocked colleague, his mind racing. He orders him to show the X-ray to the resident and immediately page thoracic surgery. Other man scrambles to follow his orders, leaving the young man alone with the patient. The memory of his premonition flashes in his mind, the terrible future he foresaw happening right now. Young man knows that any further delay will result in the patient being lost on his watch. He rapidly formulates a plan to save the man's life before it's too late. Only one solution comes to mind: a needle aspiration to relieve the air pressure in the man's lung. He yells for 16-gauge needle from a nearby nurse. The nurse hands him the needle without a moment's hesitation. He positions himself beside the patient, preparing to perform the emergency procedure. With the needle poised, he readies himself to insert it into the patient's chest. He hesitates for a split second, questioning if he has the right to do this. The young man is alone, without the supervision of a senior doctor. If he fails, his evaluation will be ruined, and he could even face a lawsuit. In the worst-case scenario, he could become the defendant in a malpractice case. The patient continues to gasp for air, his condition deteriorating with every passing second. Protagonist watches the man suffering and makes a fateful decision. He knows there isn't a second to spare, he has to act now to save him. With steady hands, he prepares to insert the needle into the patient's chest wall. He focuses, recalling the precise steps for the needle aspiration procedure. Carefully, he inserts the needle into the exact location to release the trapped air. The patient flinches in pain as the needle pierces his chest. Young man realizes the needle isn't deep enough, and he needs to advance it further. He pushes the needle with more force until it enters the thoracic cavity. Needle is now embedded in the patient's chest, and air begins to hiss out. The trapped air escapes from the man's lung, relieving the pressure on his chest. Patient is finally able to take a deeper breath, and his strained expression softens. Patient sighs with relief as his breathing gradually returns to normal. Young man celebrates as he sees the oxygen saturation climb back up to 89. The resident rushes in with the other interns, shouting for a surgeon. He looks at the patient and declares they need to insert chest tubes on both sides. The doctor then spots the needle embedded in the patient's chest and freezes in shock. He screams at the young man, demanding to know what he did to the patient. The resident grabs him by the collar, accusing him of performing an unauthorized procedure. His eyes then dart to the monitor, where he sees the improved oxygen saturation level. The doctor calls for a syringe, which a nurse quickly provides. He tells the protagonist to hold the valve steady as he takes over the procedure. Using the syringe, he begins to carefully aspirate the remaining air from the patient's lung. The young man watches the resident work, his own expression serious and focused. Doctor asks the patient how he's feeling now that he can breathe more easily. Man recounts how his wife had stepped out, and he suddenly became breathless and felt like he was fading. He says he was so weak he couldn't even make a sound to call for help. The resident reassures him, saying he'll be fine now that the crisis has passed. The patient's wife returns and is horrified to see her husband on a gurney with an oxygen mask. She rushes to his side and the young intern watches the emotional reunion. He thinks about how the patient was nearly lost due to a foolish, careless mistake. A profound sense of gratitude washes over him for having been able to save a life. The patient thanks the doctors, saying he feels much more comfortable now. The resident and the protagonist stand in silence, observing the recovering patient. The thoracic surgeon arrives and the resident greets him respectfully. He introduces himself as Medong Seep, the resident from thoracic surgery. Surgeon commends the team, stating that his service will take over the patient's care now. Resident turns to the interns, his face a mask of cold fury. He orders them to follow him to a conference room for a private meeting. The four interns shrink in fear, bracing for the resident's wrath. They line up, awaiting the inevitable lecture from their furious superior. The resident crosses his arms, glaring at them with an expression of utter disappointment. The four of them bow their heads in shame over the mistake made in the emergency room. The doctor says he has never witnessed such an absurd error in his entire career. He yells at the interns, calling them morons for mixing up the patient's left and right sides. The protagonist knows who the real culprit is but chooses to remain silent. The resident accuses them of puncturing a patient's healthy lung. He screams, asking if they are doctors or murderers for nearly taking a patient's life. The doctor vents that he's embarrassed to even face the thoracic surgery team. He lets out a long, weary sigh, completely disappointed in the intern's performance. The resident singles out Jo Jin-ji, reprimanding him for his critical error. He demotes him back to paperwork, stating he can no longer be trusted with procedures. Intern accepts the order with his head bowed, his face a picture of defeat. Resident dismisses the other 3 interns but tells our protagonist to stay behind. Young man is surprised, wondering why the doctor wants to speak with him alone. The conference room door closes, leaving the 2 of them alone for a serious talk. Doctor turns to the protagonist and says he has a question for him. He demands to know why the intern performed the procedure without consulting him first. Young man grows nervous, unsure how to answer his direct superior. Doctor warns him to choose his words carefully, as his evaluation hangs in the balance. The intern meets the resident's gaze, his own expression serious and full of apprehension.